Q&A. Konstantina Kuneva is here. She is a member of Syriza and GUI. But let me repeat something that perhaps I didn't make very clear. I'd like to thank Eva Joly from the Greens as well. But before I give the floor to Mr. Kasimatis, let me just say that Zoe talked about how this committee was from the coordinator of the citizen debt audit, and she was very much involved in the whole issue of debt annulment and debt forgiveness. So I hope that she can talk about her experience and her knowledge as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I thank you very much, Sofia Sakorafa, and all the members of this parliament for this opportunity, for this invitation. And I thank Zoe Constantopoulos for having given us the opportunity to participate on the Debt Commission and for have knowing so many wonderful Greek people that I learned to love. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Sophia. Well, I prepared the presentation. Is it on already? Yes? Okay. That audit as a precedent for any action to that. This panel is to discuss, please, is to discuss the UN principles for debt restructuring. So I would like to discuss the applicability of these principles, the debt system, the debt audit as a precedent for any action on debt, and some challenges. To start, the UN principles for debt restructuring process are very important. The sovereign right to start a restructuring process, good faith, transparency, impartiality of institutions, equitable treatment for creditors, sovereign immunity, sustainability. So, they are very important, but they would apply to a legitimate debt process. What we have found, what I mean with this, UN principles for debt restructuring process presuppose the existence, first, of an unquestionable previous debt that is going to be renegotiated, a legitimate actors and institutions, independent courts, compatibility between debt sustainability and respect for human rights at the same time. These UN principles apply to a legitimate debt process which is hardly found in reality. What have we found in Ecuador, in Brazil, in Greece, and many other countries? We have found a debt system, not a legitimate process. What we call a debt system. The debt system is the wrong use of the instrument of public debt, which functions as an instrument to transfer resources to the financial sector instead of financing the economy of nations. The main characteristic of the debt system is public debts with no counterpart, no benefit to country or society. And the main beneficiary always is the financial sector. How this debt system operates? In the first place, it generates debts. The debts emerge, are generated with no counterpart for the country or the society. In the second place, the IMF interference is in everywhere, with its economic plans inserted in the MOUs and its expertise for the agreements. Third place, the financial power influence, the weapons that Casimates were talking about. Bailing out banks are sacrificing the country and the people. In the fourth, privileges for the creditors. The debt system guarantees in law and above all rights the privilege for creditors, in legal terms, in political terms, in the major media, with the lies. And the corruption. The corruption is essential for the debt system, not only because it's corrupt itself, but it uses the minor corruption to mask, so that nobody sees the biggest corruption inserted in the debt system. To give some examples, let's take the Greek case that's most important for Europe. The interference of IMF was tremendous. The agreements since 2010 were not a Greek initiative. They were drew under the IMF expertise with the participation of the Troika. There was an evident attachment between the Memorandum of Understanding imposing a complete economic plan and the agreements. All amounts borrowed on the agreements since 2010 should be applied to accomplish the obligations imposed by the IMF, especially provide support to banks as needed. This is written in the MOU. Support the banks as needed. Lack of counterpart. Greece didn't get any benefit for any of those agreements since 2010. They were designed to privilege banks. And a very interesting thing, Greece had a legal advisor, Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen, and Hamilton, a United States firm. You understand why I'm pointing that. When I say that with no counterpart for Greece, I must explain some mechanisms that generated this debt for Greece. For example, the falsification of statistics Eric mentioned were connected to the transformation of Goldman Sachs swaps into public debt to Greece. Is that what Greece received? Nothing. But a debt was generated. In the second place, according to a third agreement hidden in one of the annex of the known bilateral agreement, the funds of this bilateral agreement were transferred to some committed lenders. Who are those committed lenders? The banks. The banks that would hold any Greek security, legitimate or not. So it was an arrange, and this mechanism utilized an account opened in ECB by the European Commission. So the institutions, the Troika, is connected to the damage to Greece. And Greece didn't get any benefit. In third, another mechanism that generated debt to Greece is connected with the ESFS loans to recapitalize banks and other benefits to financial institutions. This mechanism utilized a company created in Luxembourg a tax haven, a société anonyme, focused on the exchange of toxic assets, mostly held by private banks, into ESFS loans. The German Debt Management Office and the European Investment Bank provide support to ESFS. Again, Greece didn't get any benefits. Above all that, more debt was created by the charge of all manner of abusive costs against Greece, generating more obligation. So, I have a question for you and for my colleagues that are going to speak about this again after me. How to apply the UN principles of refinancing debt to a debt generated like this, with no benefit, with no legitimacy? How to apply a renegotiation process above this debt? Well, I want to point out some privileges of that system in Europe. First, the ECB implemented several non-standard measures, illegal measures to benefit banks. Then the Eurostat changed rules to adapt banks' interests. And then the creation of ESFS as a bridge to avoid being submitted to international law. These privileges benefit banks as generated public debt to Greece and other European countries. There are many similarities in that system between the Greek process and our Latin America countries. I'll give only one example because of time. In the 90s, we were submitted to a negotiation in Luxembourg. Imagine, Brazilian debt, Ecuadorian debt, Argentina debt were submitted to a negotiation in Luxembourg, the same Luxembourg. It was called the Brady Plan, with several illegalities. No registration of the bonds, traded privately in tax haven because no regular stock market would commerce this kind of bond, arrangements to mask accountability, new use of new bonds in privatization, no benefit at all for our countries, and a big disaster to our economy. This was the Brady Plan for us. Guess who was the legal advisor? Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen, and Hamilton. The same advisor for Greece. And why I'm pointing that? Because I was invited in 2009-2010 for a first group in UNCTAD, before this group, Principles for Restructuring. There was another group, Principles for Responsible Lending and Borrowing. And guess who was there advising UN, UNCTAD? The representative of Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen, and Hamilton. So, this is very important to say. The debt system in Brazil in these days is breaking our big, beautiful country. The debt is being generated through mechanisms of monetary policies oriented by IMF. I put the photo, detailed assessment of implementation that IMF and World Bank check every year in our country. High interest rates of almost 17%. Transformation of swap losses in public debt. An exchange of monetary basis into public debt, paying high interest rates. What we need is a debt audit before any action to debt. A debt audit will allow the access of documents and prove where the debt comes from, how much the country actually received, how much have been paid, how much we really own, who agreed this debt, where this money was applied, who benefit, and who is responsible. Only an audit can answer those questions. The debt audit is not just a technical instrument. Yes, it is technical somehow, but not only accounting. The debt audit can explain the mechanisms that generate public debt. The debt audit can clarify the reason of immeasurable growth of debt. It unveils the juridical structure of financial privileges. It proves the political instrumentalization, either dictatorship or technocracy, in benefit of financial sector. It shows the relation between the debt system and the deregulated financial architecture, which intensifies speculation in benefit of banks. The debt audit evidences how the debt system feeds the economic model that is producing unscrupulous damage to the planet and people. We need a comprehensive auditing. A debt audit is an opportunity to move from speech against debt to search for evidence of illegitimacy and illegality. A debt audit is a tool that must precede any legal actions and policies to debt. The audit report, based on documents and official data, is an instrument to concrete actions, as we saw in Ecuador, in Brazil, and especially in Greece. To end, I would like to leave some challenges and proposals. First, repeating the debt audit as a precedent for any action to debt. Then, before any restructuring, refinancing, renegotiation, or any other action, there must be a debt audit in order not to negotiate any illegal, illegitimate, odious, or null debt. Debt audit with citizen participation should be a routine. Suggestions to include this obligation in each country's legal order, disseminating the experiences of Ecuador, Brazil, Greece, and others. There is the necessity of supervision of debts before its authorization. Identify in each country the process of generation of public debt by use of financial mechanisms and increase of illegitimate debt. Do the government borrowing to bail out banks? We need a completely transparent transparency about the public debt to people who actually is paying this bill. To end, I don't know if you see the picture very well, we must deep the understanding about the necessity of regulate the new financial architecture. The financial architecture and its weapons, its agencies, risk agencies, the IMF, World Bank, central banks, they are all turned into private banks' interests. We must discuss this. And we must discuss how the debt system is feeding the economic model that is producing unscrupulous damage to planet and people. We must discuss ecological debt that we are creditors. My time is over, but this picture you see is a crime committed in my country, in my state, by BHP, Billiton, Vale, and Samarco. They destroyed many cities, thousands of creatures, 20 people, and a river, an entire river was killed for this damage. And it's a tragedy. And that there are about 1,000 of this to happen in Brazil. So we need to introduce a serious debate of that audit in UN, here in this European Parliament. We cannot keep paying, sacrificing people and the planet to pay illegal, illegitimate, and odious debt. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. I'm not going to make any comments since we'll give the floor to our audience later, but I'm going to welcome Mr. Borja, former Minister of Finance of Ecuador, together with Rafael Correa in December 2008, said that 70% of the debt of their country was illegal because it was based on agreements that were signed by military dictatorships, and they also